Boa noite a todos e todas. Sejam muito bem-vindos e bem-vindas a mais um curso da CIA Fagulha, Editora CIA Fagulha, www.ciafagulha.com.br. Novo curso Tennessee Williams, Além do Cânone. Fulvio, Torres, Flores, Luís, Márcio, Arnaut de Toledo e Thomas Kay. Todas as quintas-feiras, às 19h30, às 21h30, com a aula inicial de hoje. Este é o programa que vocês já têm detalhadamente, já receberam. Fulvio Torres Flores é doutor em Letras pela Faculdade de Filosofia, Letras e Ciências Humanas da Universidade de São Paulo, com tese sobre a dramaturgia de Tennessee Williams, docente do curso de licenciatura em Artes Visuais da Univasf, autor do livro Da Depressão Econômica às Raízes do Marcatismo, Análise Histórico-Crítica de American Blues, coletânea de peças curtas de Tennessee Williams, São Paulo, Editora Humanitas, FAPESP 2015, editor-chefe da revista eletrônica da Dramaturgia em Foco. Luís Márcio Arnaut de Toledo, doutor em Teoria e Prática do Teatro da Escola de Comunicações e Artes da USP, com tese sobre a dramaturgia de Tennessee Williams, docente de cursos de extensão do projeto Narrativas e Visualidades da Univasf, autor do livro Tennessee Williams, Algo Não Dito, São Paulo Giostre, 2018. Editor adjunto da revista eletrônica Dramaturgia em Foco. Este é o nosso convidado de hoje. Muito obrigado, Thomas, pela presença e por ter aceitado o convite. Thomas é professor de teatro e interpretação na Pace University de Nova York, nos Estados Unidos, já tendo lecionado também nas universidades de Ohio, North Carolina, Greensboro, no Lee Strasberg Institute e no Atlantic Theatre School. Tem atuado ainda como editor da New Directions, editando os títulos relacionados a Tennessee Williams desde 2002. Na apresentação de hoje, será feita a contextualização das fases Early Plays, de 1930 a 1944, e das Late Plays, 1962 e 1983. Estes são alguns dos títulos que podem ser encontrados em www.ciafagulha.com.br, WhatsApp 11 951 198357, e-mail editora@ciafagulha.com.br. Para aqueles que quiserem apoiar a editora Cia Fagulha, novos cursos, vídeos, artigos, etc., blog da Cia Fagulha, blogspot.com, Chave PIX, editora@ciafagulha.com.br. Muito bem. Agora passaremos a palavra ao Fulvio.
Bem, boa noite a todas as pessoas presentes. Eu quero agradecer, em primeiro lugar, ao professor Agenor, da editora Companhia Fagulha, pelo convite.
Nós é que agradecemos.
Obrigado. Lecionarmos esse curso. E hoje, especialmente, quero agradecer a presença do professor Thomas Keith, que nos honra estando aqui para essa aula de abertura. O trabalho do professor Thomas Keith sobre a obra do Tennessee Williams é muito importante e tem ajudado a trazer à tona um conjunto de informações e análises de alta relevância para todas as pessoas que desejam pesquisar a obra desse dramaturgo que é fundamental do século XX. Eu posso testemunhar essa relevância do trabalho do professor Keith, porque na minha tese de doutorado eu recorri bastante aos escritos dele. O nosso curso, Tennessee Williams, Além do Cânone, se propõe a ser exatamente o que o título diz. É refletir realmente sobre a obra do Williams, além do que é divulgado pela grande mídia, do que é colocado geralmente em cena, do que é levado ao cinema, e também do que a crítica e a academia a privilegiou durante décadas. Enfim, é olhar para esse autor, que tem tantas obras diversas e obras tão potentes ao longo de mais de 5 décadas de escrita para o teatro. E muitos desses trabalhos estão vindo à tona e recebendo a análise e até sendo descobertos com a ajuda do professor Thomas Keith. Então, hoje a apresentação do nosso curso vai ser breve, porque nós queremos aproveitar ao máximo a presença do professor aqui. E é isso, eu passo agora a palavra ao Thiago para as informações do professor e também, em seguida, para o Luís, a apresentação do convidado. Muito obrigado.
All right, Thomas. So he was actually thanking you for being here tonight He was talking about the relevance of your work, also about, like, he cited you at his work as well on his dissertation. You were really important to him. He's really thrilled. And he was talking about how this course is going to be very groundbreaking, because the plays that are going to be approached and analyzed are pretty important for Tennessee Williams's works. And, you know, everybody's really happy that you're here. I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
Acho que é isso. Thomas, your microphone is blocked.
Well, thank you, Fulvio. I really appreciate the invitation, and I thank you for your kind words. I want to see if does it look like I'm a little in the dark? I don't know if this will help.
No, it looks good.
Okay. On mine, it looks a little dim.
Yeah.
The first thing that I want to do is ask your forgiveness. I am what is known as Portuguese challenged.
Ele está pedindo desculpa que ele não consegue compreender português muito bem.
So I can't speak to you the way I should be, but thank you. I have Thiago here.
É, mas ele agradece por estar aqui de qualquer forma e com a tradução. Thank you.
So what I know most about this course in advance, and by the way, thank you also for Luís Márcio for inviting me, and Agenor, is that how you pronounce his name? Agenor.
Yeah. Agenor.
Agenor.
Yeah.
And David Medeiros. What I know about the course, I understood immediately when Luís Márcio told me which plays you're going to read over these weeks. The titles of the 4 early plays and the 4 late plays are very revealing.
Ele ficou bastante interessado quando ele soube de antemão quais seriam as peças analisadas aqui no curso. As peças do começo, as peças iniciais e as peças tardias são bastante, é uma escolha bastante reveladora.
Most people tend to choose Williams' most famous plays, which I don't know how much background you all have in Williams, but you probably already know The Glass Menagerie, A Streetcar Named Desire, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Those are easily his most famous plays. Many people feel his best plays. And frequently they're the end of the story when Tennessee Williams is taught at universities. They don't usually go farther than that. And Thiago, I don't know how often I should pause. Is that about a good length?
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I can just jump in now, ok? Então ele falou que normalmente as pessoas, quando vão analisar os trabalhos do Tennessee, elas costumam ir para as peças mais famosas, a Gata, em Telhado de Zinco, o Streetcar Named Desire, o Bonde Chamado Desejo, e normalmente eles vão como se isso fosse o fim da história, a carreira se encerra aí. Na verdade, tem muita coisa ainda para ser analisada. E o Glass Menagerie também, o Zoológico de Vidro, ele mencionou, né, que é uma das peças mais conhecidas também.
And when people look a little further into Williams' work, and by the way, the current count is, in terms of his theater output, is 33 full-length plays and 75 one-acts. So when people look beyond the big 3, one of the things that's come to be understood is an early period, a middle period, and a late period, which I guess is common. But the tropes that come with these 3 periods are that the middle period was his great work, that the late work is experimental and not so good, not as effective on stage, and that the early work naturally is juvenile. And there are some truths to that. However, one of the things I want to start with tonight is that, in fact, from the very beginning to the very end of his writing life, all of the work, to some degree, is experimental.
Ok. Então ele falou que tem muita coisa para ser olhada do Tennessee. Ele produziu um total de 33 peças cheias, né, peças completas, 75 peças de um ato, então tem bastante coisa aí produzida, e normalmente tem essa divisão de um período inicial, um período ali no meio e um período posterior, que são as late plays. Normalmente a crítica considera esse período do meio como ótimo e o período posterior, das late plays, como um período mais experimental. O que ele disse aqui no final é que, na verdade, do começo ao fim, o trabalho dele é bastante experimental como um todo.
Yes, Williams' experimental impulses were something that he acted upon during all of his writing life. While you're not going to talk about the middle period or the commercial period, which is considered his most successful period, I would say that the experimentalism in those plays, and there's a lot of it in Menagerie, Streetcar Cat, as well as the other plays from that period, a lot of it was sublimated or not used, not looked at, or muted because those famous plays were produced on Broadway. And from 1945 to 1961, when those famous plays were produced, his ideas about experimental theater, or not experimental theater, but rather experimenting with his brand of storytelling, was definitely not commercial. So with one exception, Camino Real, people did not recognize the experimentalism in his plays.
Então ele falou que ele teve esses impulsos experimentais, né, a vida toda, quando pega-se também as peças assim chamadas peças comerciais, que são o Cat, o Glass Menagerie, Streetcar, ele também detecta essas tendências experimentais, apesar de que elas estão em alguma medida sublimadas, ignoradas ou emudecidas, né? E aí ele fala que um período de grande sucesso das peças é justamente de 45 até 61, mas que o teatro não comercial dele também tem bastante coisa para ser analisada.
Looking at the earlier period, when Williams was starting out, from the time he was about 12, when his mother bought him an old Underwood typewriter, he started writing. And he wrote pretty much every day of his life. Wherever he traveled, whatever he was doing, he got up and wrote early. And when he was younger, in his teen years and his early 20s, he tried everything. He wrote poems, short stories. He wrote a kind of a travelogue for his high school newspaper after a trip to Europe with his grandfather. And plays were in the mix, but he wasn't focused particularly on plays until he entered a contest as an graduate at the University of Missouri and won like 6th place as a freshman, and that really excited him. He getting the 6th place prize. And he recounts that the thing that really pushed him to the theater was seeing the great Russian actress Ali Nazimova, if you've heard of her.
Então ele falou, deixa eu só anotar o nome dela aqui. Então ele falou que aos 12 anos ele ganha uma máquina de escrever da mãe dele, uma máquina de wood, né, de madeira, e ele se dedica à atividade de escritura desde muito cedo. Ele escreve poemas, ele escreve contos, ele escreve inclusive um diário de viagem, Mas as peças, na verdade, não eram o foco dele, na verdade. E isso começa, na verdade, quando ele ganha uma competição, né, quando ele ainda era um graduando na University of Missouri, a Universidade de Missouri. E ele diz que o que realmente o levou ao teatro foi quando ele viu essa atriz russa no palco. What's her name again? The Russian actress? Any? Oh, your microphone's blocked.
Alla Nazimova, sorry.
Ok. Nazimova. E aí, essa foi ali que ele realmente foi para o teatro.
And during the 1930s, I'm not going to give you a full history or we'll be here all night, but at different times, at different universities, he attended 3 different universities and he worked in his father's warehouse for a long time. He wrote dozens of one-act plays. And some of them were imitations of famous writers. He tried every kind of story you can imagine in terms of romances, westerns, gangster stories, dramas. He wrote one Japanese story based on the tales of Genji. He just experimented with form and topic in the one-act plays. During the same period, in the 1930s, he met a group in St. Louis called the Mummers. And the Mummers, M-U-M-M-E-R-S, was a labor theater that was sympathetic to socialist and humanitarian causes.
Ok. Então, nos anos 30, a década de 30 foi bastante produtiva para ele. Ele passa por 3 universidades no total, né? E ele vai escrever dezenas de peças de um ato. Muitas delas são imitações de escritores. Então, e isso vai variando entre romance, gangster stories, né, histórias de gangster e drama, inclusive japonês, né, que ele menciona. E aí, ainda nos anos 30, em St. Louis, ele vai entrar em contato com um grupo de teatro chamado Mummers, que é um labor theater, é um teatro de trabalhadores, que tem um foco mais ligado ao social, ao coletivo, né, e às lutas, provavelmente as lutas coletivas.
So about 1935, the man who at that time was the artistic director of the Mummers saw a play that Williams wrote called The Magic Tower that was done in a town outside of St. Louis. And he was so impressed with it that he asked him to write a curtain raiser, a short sketch, to be presented before a production of Irwin Shaw's anti-war play, Bury the Dead.
Yes. Então ele diz que em 1935 o diretor artístico desse grupo ele quer produzir uma peça chamada The Magic Tower, mas antes disso ele pede para que o Tennessee escreva um curtain raiser. Curtain raiser é uma peça, normalmente, uma peça curta que vai ser a peça de abertura, que vai levantar a cortina, é uma peça que vai abrir, seria o carro-chefe ali, né, para começar uma apresentação. Antes da peça do Irwin Shaw, que seria a peça que estrearia. Então ele pede para ele fazer esse curtain raiser. What's the name of the play again by Irwin Shaw? Alguém pegou o nome da peça?
Bury the Dead.
Oh, Bury the Dead. Enterre os mortos, né? Okay, Bury the Dead,
yes,
right?
Bury the Dead was the Irwin Shaw play.
Okay,
and,
all right.
And the Little Williams play was called Headlines.
Yes,
but
Headlines.
Based on that, they asked him for more plays. And he had been working on a full-length play called Candles to the Sun that is about coal miners in a coal mining camp in Alabama at that time, and involves a unionizer, a man who comes into the camp and wants to start a union. Yes, Osmar, the Mummers of St. Louis. That's exactly right. And I think this is one of the plays that Luis Marcio is going to talk to you about, so I won't say too much about it. But it was the first full-length play of his to be produced. And yeah, I mean, go on. He was in his 20s by then because he had taken so long to get through school. But it was an impressive production for a young playwright.
Ok. Então ele falou que pedem para ele escrever então mais peças, né? E aí ele vai escrever Candles to the Sun, Velas ao Sol, né? Que é uma peça que vai falar sobre mineradores ali no campo do Alabama, vai tratar de sindicalização também, e foi a primeira peça longa dele, isso foi aos 20 anos, quando ele estava com 20 anos, e basicamente é isso que ele falou. All right.
The play ran for 2 nights at this small theater in St. Louis, but it was a success. It was well reviewed, and according to William J. Smith, who was a friend of Williams at the time, who only died recently, I think in 2017, at the end of the play, the whole cast came out and the audience stood up and everyone sang Solidarity Forever, which is a socialist unionist song.
Yeah. Então ele diz que a peça, né, foi apresentada ali em 2 noites, foi um sucesso bastante grande em termos de público, e também a crítica avaliou de maneira bastante positiva. E aí, de acordo com um dos críticos, William J. Smith, ele disse que no final, quando o elenco saiu ali, o pessoal estava gritando solidariedade para sempre, que é mais ou menos um lema ali socialista. Yes.
And I'm going to read a quote from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and maybe I'll just try a line at a time, Thiago, and we can go that way. So this was a review, a St. Louis reviewer said about the play, "It stands on its own feet."
Ela fica de pé por si própria.
Its characters are genuine.
Os seus personagens são genuínos.
Its dialogue of a type that must have been uttered in the author's presence.
O diálogo ele é falado de maneira como se tivesse sido dito na presença do autor.
Its appeal in the theater widespread. Oh.
I think we lost Thiago for a while.
He'll come back.
Yes. Let's wait.
There he is.
Yes. He is.
Sorry, I accidentally clicked somewhere here. Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. So, can you repeat the last line?
The last one was, its appeal in the theater widespread.
O seu apelo para o teatro é bastante amplo.
And the observation about the dialogue of a type that must have been uttered in the author's presence.
Yes. Yeah.
Was particularly pleasing to Williams because he had never been to Alabama and he had never met a coal miner.
Isso agradou muito Williams porque ele nunca tinha estado no Alabama e ele nunca tinha conhecido nenhum minerador.
One of the things that you can track if you want to with these apprentice plays, which they're sometimes called, is that Williams is more than influenced by, he's imitating some of the playwrights of the day. And even though the content is not typical of Clifford Odets, there's a quality to the dialogue and the specificity of the jargon and the language that is reminiscent of Clifford Odets.
Então ele disse que se a gente quer rastrear realmente essas peças do período de aprendizagem do Tennessee, a gente vê que ele é influenciado por diversos autores daquela época, e apesar dele não ter uma conexão muito direta com o Odets, Clifford Odets, a gente vê que ele tem reminiscências bastante presentes ali no trabalho dele também.
That was followed by a play called Fugitive Kind in 1937, which is set in a St. Louis flophouse. Flophouse single, they used to call them single room occupancies, a kind of a hotel where people would live in a single room during the Depression.
Uhum. Então,
Go ahead.
Ele fala do Fugitive Kind, de St. Louis, e em relação a essa história do single room, né? Dessa apresentação num lugar que tem um único quarto.
The characters included radicals, writers, artists, mobsters, and hobos, all caught up in the drama of the Great Depression and the lack of work.
As personagens que se encontravam eram radicais, escritores, os hobos, as pessoas que passavam fome e pediam comida na época da depressão econômica.
So again, he's writing a play with a social conscience, which is not necessarily the way we think of Williams now. And the style and the content both were reminiscent of the playwrights Maxwell Anderson and Robert E. Sherwood, if you know those writers who wrote dramas of the day with this sort of weight to them, this kind of heaviness.
Então ele diz que a gente vê que o Tennessee tem essa consciência, ele desenvolve essa consciência social que normalmente não é associada ao trabalho dele, não se olha com esses olhos para o trabalho dele, mas em termos de estilo, de forma, de conteúdo, ele tem bastante do Maxwell Anderson, que foi um dramaturgo bastante importante também daquele tempo. And what was the other playwright you mentioned?
Robert E. Sherwood.
Robert E.
Sherwood.
Sherwood.
Yeah. The next of there were 5 full-length plays he worked on at that time. The next one was called Not About Nightingales. And it comes from a line I could write in the notes if I can find them.
Okay.
You know what? No, we can answer these questions later too.
Ele vai responder as perguntas depois. Maxwell
Yes.
Anderson.
Fulvio, that's right.
Yeah.
Winterset is the play that I'm thinking of particularly that relates to Fugitive Kind.
Okay.
So the next play he wrote was called Not About Nightingales, as in somewhere in the play, the main character is asked, what are you going to write about? And because he's expressed a strong connection to John Keats and John Keats' Ode to a Nightingale. And the character says, not about nightingales. I'm not going to write about beauty and eternity, meaning I'm going to write about something grittier and tougher. And this is, well, now it's been an important play in Brazil, and now it's going to be a more important play in Brazil because of the productions that have gone on that Luís Márcio and Andre have been involved in. So I think that's something that, I don't know Luís Márcio, if you want to talk about it now or later. And what's the Brazilian title? Inferno?
Inferno
And the basic story is about a prison somewhere in the United States where they have a room that's basically a boiler room where all the steam and heat are created, and they send the prisoners there for punishment. And the name of it, the prisoners named it Klondike.
Então ele falou que a outra peça, Not About Nightingales, O Inferno, né, que foi foi traduzido pelo Luís Márcio, produzido pelo André Garoli. E aí, na verdade, as pessoas começaram a perguntar para ele, né? E aí, o que você vai escrever? Qual é o próximo trabalho? E ele fala, Not About Nightingales, não é sobre o rouxinol, né? Sobre os passarinhos, é algo mais pesado, não vai ter a beleza, aquelas coisas que as pessoas provavelmente esperariam ver. Vai ser uma peça que vai mostrar uma certa crueldade e coisas mais pesadas. E é uma peça que vai falar de uma prisão, onde tem um quarto, né? E desse quarto você tem vapor e calor e punição, enfim, é isso aí. I think your microphone.
I guess. Thank you. I just saw. I'm trying to turn it off while you're talking, so I don't give you the extra.
Don't worry.
So I guess you could call it irony that they call it Klondike, because it's the opposite, obviously. Of anyway, Williams was at the University of Iowa, and for a playwriting assignment, they said take an item from the news, find an article in the news, and write a play about it. And he found an article about a prison in Pennsylvania that had this room called the Klondike, and several prisoners who were left in there roasted to death. And so in response to that article, he wrote Not About Nightingales.
Então, quando ele estava na University of Iowa, ele, na verdade, falam para ele tentar encontrar uma inspiração em alguma notícia, alguma coisa assim, e ele descobre que na Pensilvânia tem essa prisão, que realmente tem um quarto que mandava as pessoas para apodrecerem lá, para sofrerem lá.
Not About Nightingales ended up being important for several reasons, and one of them is that 15 years after Williams died, it was finally produced. It had never been produced during his lifetime, and it premiered in London, and then it opened on Broadway, where it was nominated for a Tony Award, and people appreciated it a lot. They naturally felt that it was, not his mature work, but that it was very theatrical, very effective, and it included a lot of the experimental techniques that he was trying out at that time.
Então ele diz que 15 anos depois da morte do Tennessee, o Not About Nightingales é produzido em London, né, em Londres, depois na Broadway, inclusive é indicado ao Tony Award, ao prêmio Tony, e as pessoas gostaram bastante, né? Apesar que ele diz que não se considerava uma peça muito madura, mas efetiva do ponto de vista teatral. Especialmente com relação às técnicas experimentais.
The next of the full-length apprentice plays was called Spring Storm, and it was published in the late 90s finally. It was not produced up until around 2000, 2001. And it's interesting because it's the first play in which Williams is essentially writing about himself. In most of the earlier works, he's writing about things that he didn't know about and didn't have any experience with. And in Spring Storm, he's writing about a Southern family in Mississippi, in a town that is essentially Clarksdale, where his family lived, in the Delta. And spread out over all these characters in this family drama are aspects of his life. And it's interesting to examine for that, because he's beginning to mature in that sense, that he's beginning to get to his own issues.
Então, a próxima peça, dessa peça longa, vai ser a Spring Storm, Tempestade da Primavera, ou de Primavera, que foi, na verdade, escrita no final dos anos 90, e ela chega a ser produzida ali entre 2000 e 2001. é a primeira peça em que efetivamente o Tennessee fala sobre si mesmo. Ele diz que ele não sabia até então, ou não tinha muita experiência com outros tipos de material, e ali, de fato, ele vai retratar uma família no sul dos Estados Unidos, especialmente no Mississippi, na cidade de Clarksdale, e os aspectos das personagens são bastante relacionados à vida dele.
Okay. And then there's one more play that he started around this time. He, in the late 30s, early 40s was when he finally left St. Louis. He spent about 6 weeks in New Orleans and then began to travel. And he became much more productive. And also he was away from home and starting his life as an artist. And it's reflected in the plays. And one of them that he thought was going to be his commercial success was called Stairs to the Roof. And it takes place in St. Louis in a shoe factory. And his father was the vice president of a shoe company, and he worked in the shoe factory. So he's taking from that. And it's about a disgruntled employee who wants more of a life than being a kind of a robotic worker. There are some elements in this play that are taken directly from Elmer Rice and his play, The Adding Machine.
Então ele diz que ali no final dos anos 30 e começo dos anos 40, o período em que ele também estava ali entre New Orleans, ele vai escrever uma peça que ele acreditava que seria um grande sucesso, que é Stairs to the Roof, seria escadas para o roof, né, para o telhado. É uma peça que se passa em St. Louis, numa fábrica de sapato, que também isso se relaciona à vida dele, e vai falar sobre um trabalhador que está em busca de uma vida menos mecânica, menos robótica. E isso também tem conexões com a estética do Elmer Rice.
Thiago, é uma fábrica de camisetas.
De camisetas?
T-shirts.
Oh, T-shirts, not a shoe factory.
What's T-shirts? Okay.
T-shirts? Okay, all right, yeah.
I believe Luis Márcio.
Okay, all right, okay.
And it's kind of a hodgepodge. It's sort of a strange mix of things. It has a mask in the middle of it, and it ends with certain, what would be fair to call sci-fi elements in terms of escaping the modern world. And the image, the metaphor is the stairs to the roof, because in the play, this worker Murphy goes to the roof to write poetry, to smoke, to get away. And then toward the end, you get the understanding that they're going to go flying to another galaxy out of Earth's orbit.
Então ele diz que é uma peça que causa um certo estranhamento, ela tem máscaras, ela tem elementos também de sci-fi, de scientific fiction, de ficção científica, né? E é uma tentativa, em alguma medida, de escapar do mundo moderno. Tem essa cena que ele menciona que a personagem vai lá para o telhado para fumar, para escapar, ela sobe nessa tentativa de escapar dali, voar para uma outra galáxia.
So in not about nightingales, somewhat in The Fugitive Kind, also in Stairs to the Roof, Williams begins to experiment with some things. Now, when I say experiment, I don't mean that these were radical. They just weren't used in typical commercial American theater. And Williams, go ahead.
Sorry. Alguém falou?
Please, go ahead.
All right, yeah, so, então ele fala que nessas peças ele experimentou bastante, mas não esse experimentalismo não chega a ser um radicalismo, mas eram coisas muito diferentes daquilo que se estava acostumado a ver no teatro comercial.
And the easiest way to describe some of these effects that he was using is a term that I don't know if he coined it, but he used it, called plastic theater. And by plastic, he didn't mean what we think of as plastic now. He meant sculptural, movable, changeable elements of theater. And another way to look at them is non-literary, right? So the text, the stage directions, even the director's perhaps metaphor for the whole play, those are literary. And the non-literary elements are light, sound, music, movement, speech, when not used in a realistic manner.
Então ele disse que um jeito mais fácil de olhar para esse tipo de técnica, que aqui a gente está chamando de experimental, é um termo que ele próprio utilizou, ele não sabe se ele cunhou esse termo ou se já existia, que é o teatro plástico, né? É um teatro mais escultural, mais mutável, em alguma medida não literário, ele menciona. Literário pelo lado do texto, pelo lado da rubrica, das stage directions, né? Mas não literário por conta da luz, do som, da música, né? É isso aí.
Yeah. The easiest examples to give, I think, would be those from the Glass Menagerie. And I haven't asked the Brazilian Williams scholars about what the translation in Portuguese is like that's published in Brazil. But in the script as published, he has a lot of notes on these plastic elements. When you see a production of the Glass Menagerie, it's quite possible that whoever directed it has ignored these notes, because they're not a requirement. You don't have to follow them, but they're there. And what he has is, during certain scenes throughout the entire play, he has signs come up with dialogue or with commentary on the action, which is considered a Brechtian device, and something that he may have been influenced by Erwin Piscator, who was Brecht's teacher, who taught at the New School in New York. But he already used those signs in Not About Nightingales. He would have signs come up at the beginning of every scene with a statement. And it's speculated that he actually got the idea for those from silent movies and signs that were posted between vaudeville acts. Because, of course, he grew up seeing silent movies and going to vaudeville. But sometimes these comments will support the action, and sometimes they'll comment on the action, or they'll anticipate it. In the Glass Menagerie, just before Laura realizes that the gentleman caller his brother's going to bring home is a boy that she knew from high school, before she realizes it, up on the screen pops, "Oh no, it's Jim." So the audience is told beforehand that something's going on, and it's interesting, because when people do decide to embrace what Williams is suggesting with the signs, they tend to take it very seriously, which is right to do. But it also turns out that a lot of them are very funny. That a lot of them are full of irony about the situation. He also has directions for different individuals to have different music underneath them, or to have a special light. So he will have a scene where Tom and Amanda are speaking, and he leaves Laura over in the living room, but the light is on her, or there's a special light on her. And that's what's considered plastic. So he's giving you information about the characters or the action that's not through the text.
É bastante coisa. Eu tentei anotar aqui, mas vamos ver. Ele menciona como um grande exemplo desse teatro plástico o The Glass Menagerie, o Zoológico de Vidro, ou A Margem da Vida, né, aqui no Brasil. E aí ele vai dizer que para o diretor é algo opcional colocar ou não essa plasticidade. Ele cita como exemplo algumas cenas em que tem placas ou sinais com diálogos. Então você tem uma sinalização ou uma descrição do que está acontecendo. Isso é bastante reminiscente do Piscator, do Irving Piscator, né, que ele menciona. Ele menciona que no próprio Not About Nightingales, né, no Inferno, a gente tem um pouco disso, com algo meio vaudeville, uma certa linguagem dos filmes mudos, filmes soundless, né, sem som. Ele menciona, por exemplo, a cena em que a Laura, quando ela percebe que o menino que está vindo ali é o menino que ela já conhece da escola, o público já sabe meio o que vai acontecer, então a gente tem essa plasticidade, né, já presente ali. Ele menciona também a questão da luz, quando tem a personagem Tom e Amanda, a luz, quando está muito focada nela, ela dá algumas informações ali que não são estritamente textuais, elas são em relação à luz mesmo. Então, se eu pulei algum detalhe, Fulvio, você pode lembrar, mas eu acho que é porque foi muita coisa, mas eu acho que basicamente foi isso.
Foi isso, Thiago. Foi isso mesmo.
Okay. All right. Thomas, by the way, the glass menagerie in Portuguese would be the glass of Zoom, the Zoom glass, it would be. Or, yeah.
Yeah. It's published, right?
Yeah.
No?
Fulvio, yeah.
Luís Márcio.
Yeah, we have published in Brazil several versions.
Several, good. Well, I don't know if that sounds experimental at all. It probably doesn't, but those kinds of things were not widely done at the time. Things were sort of realistic dramas. There were a few exceptions with Thornton Wilder using direct address in Our Town and Skin of Our Teeth, but mostly that sort of thing was not taken seriously. And when you see it in Williams' plays, in the more famous plays, people just skip it. In Streetcar, in the scene where Stanley comes home from the hospital and Stanley and Blanche are alone at night, as he becomes more menacing, the stage directions tell us that we hear jungle noises and there are grotesque, lurid shadows that appear on the wall. So her internal life is projected into the room. Well, people who take Williams as strictly realistic don't want to do that. And so what we're talking about in part is looking at these aspects of these plays, and they're in all the plays you're studying.
Ele diz que esses elementos, então, estão presentes em diversas peças, mas normalmente eles não são levados a sério quando eles fogem muito do realismo. Então ele menciona, por exemplo, no bonde chamado Desejo, no Streetcar Named Desire, quando Stanley volta do hospital e ele começa a ficar com um tom mais ameaçador, começa-se a ouvir sons de selva, né? Provavelmente remetendo à selvageria, aquela coisa, mas isso é algo que quem não é estritamente realista normalmente não contempla.
So fast forwarding a little bit through the famous plays, once Williams was no longer sort of the golden boy of Broadway, once his critical reception was beginning to fade, and it's fair to say that was around 1961 with Night of the Iguana.
Ele diz que, indo um pouco mais para frente, né, no momento em que o Tennessee já não é mais o menino de ouro ali da Broadway, em 61, especialmente quando ele escreve A Noite do Iguana, The Night of the Iguana.
Well, after that, because it's I don't know if you have this in Brazil, but playwrights particularly suffer this fate that they're in or they're out. And when they're out, it's not pretty. You know, the way that the critics and the public sometimes receive them. I think Williams had a following from the public that the critics just weren't interested in. And he had been getting more and more difficult reviews. And then after Iguana, he spent the next 20 years of his life, the rest of the time he was alive, getting really harsh reviews from the critics. And the first play that he wrote after Iguana was called The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore. Do you have that title? Go ahead.
Yep. Então ele falou que os dramaturgos têm, ele quer saber se aqui no Brasil também a gente tem isso, né? Dessa história dos dramaturgos terem um destino de ou você tá dentro ou você tá fora, né? E se você tá fora, obviamente não é legal, isso não é positivo. E o Tennessee foi bastante criticado, né? E depois do The Night of the Iguana, ele começa a sofrer duras críticas, severas críticas por parte dos críticos em geral, né? Eu acho que foi basicamente isso daqui que ele falou.
Okay. Ele falou da peça The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here Anymore. Que foi
The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here. Isso.
Foi a primeira que ele também se escreveu depois da Noite do Iguana.
Isso, depois de 20 anos, né?
Não, logo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Não é depois de 20 anos, foi depois de 20 anos fazendo sucesso ininterrupto.
Ele recebeu duras críticas.
Aí ele recebeu duras críticas com The Milk Train.
Isso. The Milk Train Doesn't Stop Here
Anymore. I had never heard the phrase before. I thought it was antiquated, you know, when he wrote it. It's an old expression that essentially means no one's going to get things from me again.
Ele achou que era uma expressão bastante antiquada inicialmente, né? E foi algo como ninguém mais vai conseguir nada de graça de mim.
Well, the play involves a woman who lives on her own private island. She flies the flag of a monster. She is visited by the angel of death. And the play incorporates traditions from kabuki theater in the way it's staged.
Então, é uma peça que vai tratar de uma mulher que está numa ilha privada. Ela vai receber a visita do anjo da morte. And you mentioned the kabuki theater?
Yes. He incorporated stagehands from kabuki theater and from No as well, who came on stage and served different role functions.
Ele acabou adicionando toques do kabuki theater.
E do No também.
Yeah.
Teatro No.
And Luís said the No theater, the Japanese No theater as well.
No, some aspects of No and some aspects of kabuki. The thing is that Williams had seen this theater, this Japanese theater, but he didn't really know it. So he was just sort of, you know, cherry picking what he wanted to use. Mm-hmm. And oh, go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
This was confirmation for the critics that he had lost his mind and that he was going downhill. And yes, it was going a little farther, but he finally just decided not to worry about them quite as much. And so his content and his styles became more and more playful and more theatrically interesting. And this is how it came to be that they described the late plays as experimental.
Ok, então ele falou que no caso dessa influência do teatro japonês, ele não estudou muito a fundo, mas ele pensou alguns elementos ali de maneira cherry picking, né? Ele foi pegando algumas coisas e foi fazendo, e a crítica passa a dizer que o trabalho dele dali começa a ir ladeira abaixo. E aí ele decide em um momento não se preocupar mais tanto com isso, e aí, na opinião dele, é justamente quando o conteúdo e o estilo das peças, eles ficam mais interessantes.
And so that play, they produced it twice on Broadway, 1963 and 1964, and both productions closed very quickly. The next Broadway play was a combination of one-act plays called Slapstick Tragedy.
Ele diz que então a peça foi ela foi apresentada na Broadway em 63, 64, teve poucas apresentações, fechou logo em seguida. Em seguida vem a Slapstick Tragedy, a tragédia pastelão.
Right, and there he's combining two opposites. You know, slapstick, is that the word you use?
Yeah, it's a pastelão in Portuguese.
Right. Combining that with tragedy. And the critics didn't take too well to that either. The first one act was called the Gnädiges Fräulein, which is German for probably pretty miss. And it was about some boarders in a house, a boarding house in Key West, Florida, and a woman who had been a famous German singer who was reduced to fighting an imaginary bird called a cockaloonie bird for fish. And when the play starts, the bird has already plucked out one of her eyes, and by the end of the play, she's blind. And it's a comedy. And it's really, really funny. And people in the theater tended to like it, but the critics didn't like it. The other play is called The Mutilated, also a comedy. So you can see just by the titles that he really didn't care what people thought. He was going to write what he was interested in and what he felt was going to tell the stories he wanted to tell. And in The Mutilated, it's really a fight between these two friends. One of them is an over-the-hill prostitute in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and the other is the heiress to a Texas oil baron who has had a mastectomy from cancer, and hence the title, The Mutilated. And I'll just stop there so you don't have to translate this whole thing, but take my word for it. It's very funny, it's very playful, and it's dark.
Ok. Então ele diz que é uma coisa que causou estranhamento, né? Porque ele conjuga dois opostos, a tragédia de um lado, o slapstick do outro, que é essa coisa da comédia pastelão. E aí ele menciona dois exemplos, o Gnädiges Fräulein, acho que o Luís Márcio colocou aí no comentário o nome certinho em alemão, né? Fräulein, The Pretty Lady, a senhora bonita, alguma coisa, não sei qual é a tradução. E aí ele diz que trata de uma cantora alemã que luta contra um pássaro imaginário. E aí ele diz que é essencialmente uma comédia, na mesma medida em que The Mutilated, As Mutiladas, também é. As Mutiladas, que o Luís Márcio também estudou, ela trata de uma briga entre duas amigas, uma que é uma prostituta, a outra que é uma personagem que fez uma mastectomia, né? E daí vem o título As Mutiladas. E é uma comédia, e ele fala, olha, confia, porque de fato é uma comédia. Tem elementos ali de humor ácido, né? Mas ainda é uma comédia.
Okay.
Yes.
And this continued up until a few months before he died in 1983. He continued to experiment, and he probably, I don't know what the exact figure is, but he easily wrote more plays in the last 20 years of his life than he did in the prior 20 years. And he never again got a real success. He never had he had a lot of plays on Broadway, no successes, and he just kept writing. And now I'm trying to think here. I can say a few words about each of the plays you're going to look at this during this course. Is that something that would be a good idea, Luis Marcio? Roberto saying yes?
Yes, it would be very good. It would be wonderful.
Well, we talked about Candles to the Sun. The Strange play was very recently published, and and one of the reasons I was attracted to it, it is an early work. It probably predates Stairs to the Roof, and yet it has some of the similar aspects to it. Because there aren't a lot of versions of it, usually with Williams there's a lot of drafts. So these unpublished plays, you can get a sense of it gives you more information about what he was trying to do than if you just have one early play. But it seems to me to be the story of a woman's life that's told in one day. Meaning she is born, lives, has a child, and dies in about 24 hours. And she's aware that the time is fleeting, but there's nothing she can do about it. And like Stairs to the Roof, it has this a science fiction aspect to it. And that's also surprising because it's pre-World War II. He's addressing a certain level of chaos that is so intense that people want to escape it and go to another planet. Again, something you probably don't associate with Williams.
Então ele diz que ele continua, na verdade ele continua com essa experimentação até antes de morrer, e ele começa a fazer mais peças nos últimos 20 anos antes de morrer, mas também todas sem o sucesso que ele almejava. E aí ele menciona essas duas peças, né, The Strange Play. Ele vai dizer que ela tem aspectos que dialogam ali centralmente com aspectos do The Stairs to the Roof, que ele já tinha mencionado antes, né? E ele vai dizer que ele vai tratar da vida de uma mulher, basicamente em um dia, né? Então é a vida dela, ela casa, tem filho, isso é colocado ali muito rapidamente, esse ciclo, e isso também tem a ver com os Stairs to the Roof, com aquela coisa sci-fi de ficção científica que ele já tinha mencionado. E essa peça, ela está situada no período do pré-Segunda Guerra Mundial, no momento de caos, aquele momento de turbulência, em que as pessoas querem realmente escapar dali. E aí a gente pensa no título, né? Stairs, a escada lá para o telhado, para querer fugir de tudo aquilo.
The Case of the Crushed Petunias, I don't remember what it says on the script. It might be that it's a fantasy or a fable, which is
a lyrical fantasy.
A lyrical fantasy. So it is a fantasy, and it's kind of like a fable or a children's story. And it's a gentle play, but it's a variation on a theme that runs through much of Williams' work, and that is the Puritan who has the soul of an outsider and finally releases that energy, interest, curiosity into the world. Go ahead.
Yep. Ele vai mencionar então essa outra peça, o The Case of the Crushed Petunias, que está ali situado entre uma fantasia, o Fulvio mencionou essa fantasia lírica, né? ou ele também diz que o Thomas fala que é uma fábula, e vai tratar de um puritano que tem a alma de um outsider. E ele acha uma maneira de extravasar isso.
10 blocks on the Camino reel. I was happy to see it on this list. He started this play in, I think 1945 or 1946, and worked on it for many, many years. It also a fantasy. It was published as this one-act version in 1948, and some actors were working on it at the Actors Studio on scenes from it, directed by Elia Kazan, and Williams went to see it, and Kazan encouraged him to keep writing, and eventually he came out with the full-length Camino reel, which opened on Broadway in 1953 to horrific reviews. The arts community loved it. He was backed up. There was even a full-page ad taken out in the New York Times that was signed by painters and composers and novelists and writers and theater people saying, this play has to stay open. It didn't, it closed. And in 10 blocks, you're looking at the beginnings of that story, which I don't know if Luis Marcio will agree with me on this or not, but I think that it's an allegory about America and Americans in terms of the choices they make in relation to the rest of the world. And it's political in that sense, but because it's an allegory, people didn't really see that, particularly at that time. But the main character is named Kilroy, which was a common name for American soldiers during World War II. And he is at heart an innocent. He is naive. He is easily cheated. He is baffled by love. And he's set down in a world that's much darker than that. And it's how he finds his way out.
Então ele está falando do 10 Blocks and the Camino Reel, que é uma peça que provavelmente entre 45 e 46, também é uma fantasia, né? Ela é publicada na versão de um ato. A peça completa, ela sai um pouco depois, com ótimas reviews, né? Tem boas críticas e tudo mais. E essa, na verdade, ele escreve essa peça completa baseado no conselho do Kazan, do diretor Kazan, Elia Kazan, né, que o incentiva a escrever. Então, isso tem boas críticas, a peça é bastante elogiada. Houve um esforço por parte de pintores, atores, comunidade artística, falando, não, essa peça tem que ficar. Só que aí a peça, na verdade, acaba não dando certo. Ele enxerga a peça como uma alegoria do America, né, dos Estados Unidos e os americanos e os estadunidenses e as escolhas que eles fazem. E aí ele pergunta se o Luís Márcio concordaria ou não com a opinião dele. Nessa peça é retratada, tem um personagem que é o Killer Joe. Killer Joe é um nome... Era o nome, na época, de soldados que costumavam matar as pessoas, né? Só que, na verdade, ele acaba sendo o oposto disso. Ele é uma pessoa inocente, Killer Roy. Ele é meio bobão, ele é meio apaixonado, né? Então, é bastante diferente do que se espera.
That's the very short version. You'll get the longer version from Luis Marcio. And so those with Candles to the Sun, those are the 4 earlier plays. And then the 3, I think there's 3 later plays. I have The Day on Which a Man Dies, A Cavalier for My Lady, and The Chalky White Substance. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And The Day on Which a Man Dies is fascinating because it wasn't uncovered. He wrote different versions of it, and there are complete versions, and that's what's published. But he was still working on it, and he had so many plays like that where he had complete versions, unfinished versions, and he just would work on them over years and decades. And this is one that didn't get a production while he was alive. but it also has a subject matter that you can find in a lot of his plays, and it has to do with the artist's creative, not exactly the details of their process, but their process in terms of their output of energy, humanity, and soul, and how it burns them up. The more the artist uses of themselves, the more they can destroy themselves.
Então ele fala de the day in which a man dies. Ele vai dizer que tem diversas versões dessa peça. Tem versão que não está completa, tem versão completa, são diversas publicações. E aí ele diz que essa peça, ela trata de um assunto que está presente em em praticamente todas as peças do Tennessee, que vai tratar do processo criativo do artista. Basicamente, ele menciona que a gente vai ter ali a energia, a humanidade e a alma do artista.
And because it's Tennessee Williams, it couldn't just be told any old way. He had been visiting Japan with his friend Yukio Mishima, and again, he connected with something in the theater there personally and added elements to this play. And it's subtitled An Occidental No Play. And there's a Japanese narrator. And it takes elements of No, as well as a Japanese performance art and theater form called gutai. And he takes a gutai component and puts it right in the play, where there'd be a roll of paper that went across the floor and up, so it could be vertical. And the painter paints with his body on the sheet on the floor and then rolls it up this way. And in gutai in Japan, the painter would at some point destroy the picture by jumping through the paper. And that's one of the things that happens in the play. It's fascinating. Did I talk to so long that Thiago just quit?
I think we've lost him again.
He'll be right back.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, I loved you said that about 10 blocks. It's allegory of American about what they think about themselves. I agree with you.
Well, and I think people wouldn't have liked it because it was not an attractive picture of Americans. You know, I mean, it's not anti-American. I mean, Kilroy his innocence actually saves him at the end, but his innocence is the cause of a lot of problems as well. His naivete. Hi, Thiago.
Hi, I'm sorry.
Hi.
I just put my phone connection because the Wi-Fi is really bad.
It's okay.
I'm sorry. So you were talking about the Occidental No Play, right?
Yeah, the last thing I had said, I don't know if you heard it, was that he was imitating gutai, which is the Japanese performance art theater.
I did, yep.
Where he's painting on the floor and then jumps through the picture.
Right. Então, ele vai falar um pouco sobre essa experiência, esse grupo de performance, né, japonesa. Ele vai, na verdade, visitar um amigo dele, e aí ele vai ter alguma inspiração para escrever essa An Occidental No Play, né? Eu não sei se o Luís Márcio chegou a colocar o título em português, mas que tem esses elementos do teatro japonês e esse componente chamado gutai, que ele menciona, que é do teatro japonês.
An Occidental No Play é o subtítulo de The Man on Which a Man Dies. The Day on Which a Man Dies.
Ok,
Sorry.
tá bom.
E o grupo Gutai é um grupo de vanguarda japonesa, um grupo de performance, onde o Tennessee se baseou na performance desse grupo para criar
A no play.
da peça.
Uhum.
A gente vai estudar isso, né? A gente vai estudar a peça.
All right.
I'm not sure what I have to say about A Cavalier for My Lady. It's a really interesting play, and he brings in all kinds of components that are surprising, and they don't tell a neat story. It's not a regular narrative, but you have a grown woman dressed as a child, seated on a couch, when her mother and a friend are going to go out on the town to pick up guys, to pick up men. And she leaves the daughter with an Irish babysitter, and they don't get along. And the daughter, the child woman daughter, has a lot of sexual fantasies. She's extremely sexualized, but she's dressed like a little girl. And one of the things that happens is this statue of Nijinsky, the Russian dancer, comes to life. And they have scenes together, and she's very attracted to to Nijinsky. She was sort of looking at the statue, but once he comes to life, she's really attracted, and he says, "But you can't touch me or I'll disappear." So
Então,
it's this longing.
okay. O Cavalier, for My Lady, for Milady, é uma história bastante surpreendente. Ela tem uma narrativa que não é muito organizada, e é a história dessa adulta, na verdade, que se veste como criança. Ela está sentada no sofá ali, vendo a mãe sair para buscar homens, né? E tem esses elementos aí de estranhamento, em alguma medida. Ele menciona um momento em que tem a estátua do Nijinsky, dancer, né? O Nijinsky, russo, e que ela toma vida, e enfim, é basicamente isso daqui.
And so I would say one of the main things happening in that play is this longing for physical connection with another person and it being impossible, which is a metaphor for all kinds of things.
Ele menciona, então, que um dos pontos principais da peça é esse desejo pela conexão física, o desejo da conexão física, que em alguma medida é impossível.
And this follows into the last of the three, which is called the chalky white substance. And it takes place, I think, about 400 years in the future. And not everything about this world is stated outright, but you understand that there have been warring factions and nuclear wars to the point where there isn't much left for the people who still exist. And there's a kind of an ash and a substance that's in the air everywhere and that causes people to cough and choke. And it's the remnants of that war. And in this world, you meet two men, one who's younger, one who's a little older, and they are lovers. And the older one is kind of protector of the younger one because resources are scarce, and you do things to get points with the government. It's also Orwellian in a way, but water is very precious. And they have a secret water source that the older man doesn't know about. And once he finds out that the younger man has this source, no matter how affectionate they are in the beginning of this short play, when he can use him for something and turn him in, he turns him into the government to get favor. You want to try that?
Yeah. All right, yeah. Então ele vai falar do chalky white o título está ali completo, né? O Luís Márcio colocou. Substância, acho que é, né? É uma história que se passa 400 anos no futuro, né? Para frente, em que, na verdade, nada é muito dito claramente ali. Então, a gente sabe que provavelmente houve uma guerra nuclear, e não tem muita coisa para as pessoas que estão ali, em termos da vida, né? Para as pessoas que estão existindo ali naquele presente. Existe cinza e alguma coisa ali no ar que remete ao título, né? The Chalky Substance, essa substância do giz, né? E vai tratar da história de dois homens, um mais jovem, outro mais velho. Esse mais velho sendo o protetor desse mais novo. E o jovem, na verdade, a gente descobre... Na verdade, tem uma questão ali de que tem uma fonte de água, que é bastante importante na história. Tem questões de delação, de entregar para o governo nessa situação praticamente apocalíptica, e ele menciona que é uma história que se liga com uma essência do orwelliana, né? Do George Orwell.
Yeah, and there's something in this story it's more blunt than it normally is in Williams, but again, it's kind of an opposition where on the one hand you have strong human connection through physicality, but you also have people using each other. So the physicality and the love and the connection is also transactional, which those things, may or may not be in opposition, but I think they are, at least dramatically.
Uhum. Ele diz que tem uma coisa bastante interessante em relação a essa peça, que de um lado você tem essa questão da conexão bastante forte, né, dessas personagens que se conectam fortemente, e do outro, pessoas que estão se usando mutuamente, né? São fisicalidades, eu anotei aqui, mas eu não estou...
Falou em conexão através da fisicalidade.
Fisicalidade, mas ele tinha falado alguma outra coisa, enfim.
E também que as pessoas usam umas às outras, é a oposição.
Isso.
Ao mesmo tempo que há essa conexão, há o uso. Foi isso.
Exato. Mas ele tinha falado, mas tudo bem. Fisicalidade.
Yeah. Another aspect to it is that it was written in 1981, and around that time, it's sort of easy to forget, but was when in the late 70s, before détente was reached, the fear that the Soviet Union or the United States might launch a nuclear missile was stronger than it had ever been. And people were worried about it. And it was definitely an anxiety in the United States. And it shows up in his last full-length play, A House Not Meant to Stand, and it's alluded to in a couple other plays. But this is where it's most obvious that there's anxiety in Williams about nuclear war or annihilation. Go ahead.
Esse clima ali do começo da década de 80, final da década de 70, esse clima de polarização, né, o medo da União Soviética de um lado e os Estados Unidos do outro, as duas grandes potências, é algo que aparece na atmosfera dessa peça, e o Williams traduz essa ansiedade através do medo da guerra nuclear e dessa superpotência.
And as with almost all of Williams' full-length plays, began as either a poem, a story, or a one-act, or all three. He would start these ideas, these little germs, and then he would expand and expand and expand to a full-length play. Do you want to say that, Thiago?
Yeah. Então ele diz que as peças do Williams, normalmente elas vêm de poemas, elas vêm de contos, elas vêm de peças de um ato, e elas se expandem para virar full-length plays, para virar essas peças, as peças completas, né?
Well, in the files at Harvard, is the beginning of a full-length version of the Chalky White Substance, in which you see, among other things, that there is sort of a men's camp and a woman's camp. And at one point, the young man in the one-act play is talking to the woman who is sort of the leader of the woman's camp and asking her about things before the time of the big explosions. And they find a document, and he wants to know what it is, and from that time. And it's a poem, which I thought we could end with reading it, if you want to give the intro, Thiago. And then maybe do you want me to read it in English, or should you just read it in Portuguese? Do you want to do both?
Both, yeah.
I'll read a couple lines, and then you'll be following along, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay,
So if you
can I just introduce to them what you said? Yeah. All right, so, então ele falou que em Harvard tem manuscrito dessa peça completa, né? Em que a gente tem o homem e a mulher, e na verdade tem trecho ali que vem de poema, que é quando ele fala com a mulher antes das explosões. E aí ele vai ler em inglês o poema e eu leio em português. Yeah. Do you want to read the poem?
It's called Your Blinded Hand.
So Thomas, you want to read the whole poem, and then I'll read in Portuguese, or line by line? What do you prefer?
I'll just do a couple of lines if you want to follow along at a time.
Okay.
And then just tell them the title.
Okay. Sua mão cega.
Suppose that everything that greens and grows should blacken in one moment, flower and branch. I think that I would find your blinded hand.
Suponha que tudo que fica verde e cresce deva escurecer em momento, flor e galho. Acho que encontraria sua mão cega.
Suppose that your cry and mine were lost among numberless cries in a city of fire when the earth is afire. I must still believe that somehow I would find your blinded hand.
Suponha que o seu choro e o meu estivessem perdidos entre inúmeros choros, em uma cidade de fogo, quando a terra está em chamas. Eu ainda devo acreditar que, de alguma forma, encontraria sua mão cega.
Through flames everywhere, consuming earth and air, I must believe that somehow, if only one moment were offered, I would find your hand.
Através das chamas em todos os lugares, consumindo terra e ar, eu devo acreditar que, de alguma forma, se apenas momento fosse oferecido, eu encontraria sua mão.
I know, as of course you know, the immeasurable wilderness that would exist in the moment of fire. But I would hear your cry, and you'd hear mine, and each of us would find the other's hand.
Eu sei como, claro, você sabe a imensurável selva que existiria no momento do fogo. Mas eu ouviria o seu choro, e você ouviria o meu, e cada de nós encontraria a mão do outro.
We know that it might not be so, but for this quiet moment, if only for this moment, and against all reason, let us believe and believe in our hearts that somehow it would be so. I'd hear your cry, you mine, and each of us would find a blinded hand.
Nós sabemos que não pode ser assim, mas para esse momento de silêncio, mesmo que apenas para esse momento, e contra toda razão, vamos acreditar, e acreditar em nossos corações que de alguma forma seria assim. Eu ouviria o seu choro, você o meu, e cada de nós encontraria uma mão cega.
So once again, he's taken that fear of annihilation and turned it into a metaphor about human connection. And I can't get my hand through Zoom, or I would shake your hand. So that's about all I have. I think we have 25 minutes for questions, maybe.
Então ele falou que nesse poema ele representa esse medo da aniquilação e transforma isso numa metáfora nesse poema. Quem quiser o poema, eu fiz a tradução, eu posso mandar em PDF depois, eu mando para o Agenor, ele manda para vocês. Tem o original e tem o em português, que eu traduzi. Tá bom. All right. Yeah, so you want to go for Q&A?
Sure. Is that Roberto? Roberto has a question.
Ok. O que faz agora, Agenor? Eu leio em português e traduzo, ou alguém lê em português e eu traduzo? O que a gente faz?
Eu posso ler em português, Thiago, você faz a versão.
Tá bom. He's going to read in Portuguese, then I'll translate for you, ok?
Por favor, aqueles que quiserem fazer suas questões, exponham no chat.
All right. So, does anybody have a question? Alguém tem pergunta?
Bom, talvez então.
Eu acredito que antes o Luís vai falar um pouquinho das publicações do Thomas.
Okay, all right, tá bom. Thomas, before the Q&A, Luís Márcio is going to talk about your publications.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay? All right.
Então, pessoal, eu queria mostrar que eu tenho os livros que o Thomas publicou, e eu acho que é interessante a gente conhecer, né, um professor importante da PIX University, importante para a obra do Tennessee, né? Eu conheci no Professional Festival, Tennessee Williams Festival, em 2019, então já há 2 anos a gente tem contato, temos nos falado frequentemente, desde então, me ajuda muito a entender a obra do Tennessee. Algumas vezes a gente cruza as ideias, outras vezes a gente não, pensamos diferente, né? Eu queria mostrar um livro que ele me deu, quando eu estive com ele, que é esse aqui, ó. The Look of Friendship, The Letters, as cartas do Tennessee, com o dono da editora, o James Laughlin, né, que é esse livro. Então, as trocas de cartas do Tennessee com o dono da editora, que eles eram muito amigos, e é fantástico essa conversa, né? Eu estou apresentando aqui os livros, mas vocês vão pensando aí nas perguntas, viu, gente? Já termino, né? 2 minutinhos.
Thomas, he's introducing you. He's saying how you guys met at the festival, that you're such a great scholar. You've been shedding lots of light into Tennessee Williams's works and ideas. He showed us the book, the letters, right? And he's really excited about having met you.
The other one is this, Love Christopher Street, about, bom, tô falando em inglês, né? Em português, né? O outro livro é Love Christopher Street, é um livro sobre as questões LGBT nos Estados Unidos, na Nova York, especialmente na Christopher Street.
Thank you, Luís Márcio. I feel very lucky to have met Luís Márcio and David Medeiros. Yeah, it's exciting that there's this many people interested in Williams besides the famous plays in Brazil, and hopefully it'll lead to more productions. The other volume, which I doubt you can get there, it's called Love Christopher Street, and it's an anthology of LGBTQ essays about New York City.
Muito feliz que o pessoal, que a gente aqui no Brasil está interessado nas outras peças não famosas, né? Ele ficou muito feliz também com o livro do Love Street, né, do que o Luís Márcio mostrou agora, que trata das questões LGBT, né? All right.
Os outros que eu mostrei são livros do Tennessee, viu, gente? Ele, como editor na editora New Directions, então, esse livro aqui, Magic Tower Another One Night Place, é um conjunto, uma coletânea de peças em um ato. Essa também, Now the Cats with Joy the Claws, Something Loud, Something Clear, Coming in Real. Coming in Real is your addictions, Thomas. Really?
I was the editor at the publishing firm for that,
Okay.
not the scholarly editor.
Okay.
But that's fine. Just, yeah.
Ok, just some of alguns dos trabalhos deles, tá? Que eu estou mostrando para vocês. Ele tem muito mais, é claro. Ele trabalhou com uma...
When we said questions, the first person to jump in was Roberta.
Roberto foi o primeiro a levantar a mão, né? Na pergunta.
Thiago.
Daniel? Oi.
Só antes da gente passar para as perguntas, eu quero fazer, em meu nome, do Luís e do Agenor, um agradecimento muito especial a você pela tradução consecutiva, porque a sua colaboração foi inestimável para a realização do pleno acesso ao conteúdo dessa aula. Então, muitíssimo obrigado mesmo por estar aqui com a gente e por ter feito essa tradução.
Imagina, I've never done that before. Eu nunca fiz tradução assim simultânea, primeira vez.
Mas
acho
foi
que
ótimo.
Deu certo, né?
Está sendo ótimo.
Ok, alright. Ok, obrigado. Acho que o Fulvio travou. Ok, obrigado.
As questões. Na verdade, a gente agradece muitíssimo, está sendo ótimo. E acho que agora a gente pode passar para as questões. Eu vejo, acho que 2 pessoas com mão.
All right, Thomas, we're heading to the questions, okay? All right, so, imagina, gente, quem que vai ser o primeiro? E aí o Agenor vai ler, né? Então o Agenor vai ler e eu traduzo, é isso?
Ok. Então vamos para do Luís Ângelos. Das peças mais experimentais, das citadas, quais têm mais influências de sua irmã Rose?
Eu não ouvi qual que tem mais...
Influências de sua irmã Rose.
Okay, so Thomas, out of the most experimental plays that you cited, which one do you think that has more influence or connection to Rose, the sister of Tennessee Williams? Oh, I think your microphone's blocked. It's all right. That happens all the time.
Sorry. Thank you for your patience. Agenor, are you referring to the ones that we talked about today?
Yeah. In the question, it states like out of the ones you mentioned, which one do you think? Yep.
Yeah, I would say a Cavalier for My Lady.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's a complex connection to his sister, but at the time he wrote that play, his sister, who had been subjected to a lobotomy in her late 20s, was quite an older woman, but had the mind and personality of a child.
Okay.
That's sort of the most obvious connection to Rose.
Ele diz que a conexão mais óbvia com a Rose é no Cavalier for My Lady. Quando ele escreve, na verdade, ela já havia feito a lobotomia, né? E apesar dela já estar mais velha, ela ainda se comportava como uma criança, né? Por conta da própria questão cerebral, né? Mas essa é a que mais se evidencia isso. Tá bom? Yes, great.
Daniel.
Ok.
Oi, vocês me escutam?
Yes, sim.
Bom, antes de fazer a pergunta, eu queria agradecer essa organização desse curso, que eu achei maravilhoso, achei muito, muito interessante, então muito obrigado. Agradecer também o Thomas pela disponibilidade, por essa maravilhosa exposição dele. E o que eu queria perguntar tem a ver com... Na verdade, eu tenho algumas questões, né? Uma delas seria em relação a essas peças que são mais admiradas, que são mais conhecidas? Quais seriam as qualidades dessas peças principais que são vistas pelos dramaturgos atuais, pelos críticos atuais, e quais as maiores críticas, as maiores questões que são criticadas nas peças nos Estados Unidos? Essa seria uma das questões.
So Thomas, he was talking about the most famous plays of Williams, right? So he wishes to know which are the qualities that make them so successful and so great, or they're greatly referred to by critics. Oh, the microphone's blocked again.
I'm thinking about the question. I think it's a number of factors, but I would include the lyric and poetic nature of his language. In English is especially beautiful, and it's heightened language, and it's very dense language. But it's also language that makes people feel that it's the way people speak. And it's not the way people speak. They only speak that way in Tennessee Williams plays, but he takes enough idiom from regular language that people are always saying, oh, the language, oh, how those characters speak. I relate to that so much. I would say, yes, the critics appreciate that. I think the dramatic stories, but I think the biggest thing is his empathy for people who would be considered outsiders, whether it's because of their artistic nature, their sensitivity, their sexual orientation, all the reasons that people don't feel like they fit in with the pack. And that's sort of interesting in America because particularly 40s, 50s, before the 60s, people were put into boxes and everybody was supposed to fit in even more to some extent than they are now. And Williams' characters broke that conformity.
Okay. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's an answer. Yeah.
Ok, então ele fala que são vários, né, os fatores, mas ele atribui bastante a natureza poética e lírica do Tennessee, especialmente na língua inglesa, né? Então ela tem essa característica bastante de uma linguagem bastante densa e ao mesmo tempo uma linguagem que as pessoas falam, né? Mas ele fala, na verdade elas não falam essa linguagem, você só vê nas personagens do Tennessee Williams. Então tem essa coisa das expressões idiomáticas com as quais as pessoas se identificam, né? As histórias dramáticas, né? Com certeza também tem aí o seu papel. E a questão da empatia do Tennessee. Então, ele tende a colocar essas personagens que são outsiders, né? São essas pessoas que estão ali à margem, seja por questões de opção sexual, de orientação sexual, seja por sensibilidades, qualquer que seja, enfim, o rótulo, né? Que a pessoa, no qual a pessoa se encontra. E é algo que durante os anos 40, 50, 60, até nesse período, as pessoas estavam em caixas. Aí a gente pensa dos anos 60 para frente, especialmente pelas personagens do Tennessee, isso começa a ser quebrado, né? A partir dos anos 60. Acho que respondeu? Tá tranquilo?
Sim. Acabou que não apareceu nenhum ponto de crítica, né? Teria algum ponto que os críticos falam de um ponto falho que aparece de uma forma recorrente?
Thomas, which are negative aspects that appear in those plays as criticism?
That they're too sexual, that they're too dark, that they are sensational because of some of the topics that they deal with, that they're too poetic.
Okay.
See that list I had quicker. I could think of that right away.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
Thank
you want me
you,
to?
Dan.
Sorry. Go on.
Okay. I was just saying thank you, Danielle, and
Ok. Daniel, ele falou que pela questão muito da sexualidade, né? Questões sexuais, muito obscura, né? Muito sensacionalista e também muito poética, né? Então podia, quer dizer, muito poética e exagero. Ok?
Ok, agora a pergunta do Fulvio, Torres, Flores. Thomas, como tem sido o trabalho de descoberta de peças de Tennessee, como The Strange Prey, que foi publicada há poucos anos e ficou décadas desaparecida, entre aspas?
So, Thomas, this is Fulvio asking you, how do you think that the discovery process of Tennessee Williams's works, such as The Strange Play, that has been published recently, right, and was kind of lost, how is the process of discovering those plays?
That's a great question. At the time of his death, there were quite a few plays that were either unpublished or unproduced that he wanted to be published or produced. The entirety of the Traveling Companion volume falls into that category. Some plays from Mr. Paradise, Magic Tower, etc. So it seems to take time from the time that the plays are introduced to the public, either through publication or in some cases through successful productions, like Not About Nightingales, the Inferno play. That's actually done fairly frequently at colleges now, but it's taken 20 years for it to really catch on and become part of the Williams canon. So some of the smaller plays, the more experimental plays, The Day on Which a Man Dies, Cavalier for My Lady, Chalky White Substance, those are all short plays. So the appeal is not necessarily as widespread professionally, but they are beginning to catch on. And Chalky White Substance gets done fairly often. The Strange Play is pretty new. That was published in 2016. So we'll see about that one. But I do have a Google alert for Williams, which brings in all kinds of strange things. But I have kept an unscientific track of this, and more you see evenings of one-act plays that include some of the older ones, some of the newer ones, some from Mr. Paradise, from different, they're pairing up evenings of Williams plays that include the late ones. And so that's encouraging.
Ok. Então ele disse que, né, na verdade, o Williams, ele morreu, quando ele morreu, na verdade, algumas das peças, né, não tinham sido publicadas ou não produzidas, peças que ele queria muito, né, e ele chega à conclusão de que parece levar tempo, né, para que as peças cheguem à visibilidade, seja via publicação, seja via produção, encenação, né, de sucesso, das peças de sucesso também. Tem algumas peças que são produzidas em colleges, em faculdades, né, também. E aí ele vai dizer que algumas têm vão ter um apelo profissional, outras vão ter um apelo acadêmico, mas que aos poucos algumas vão aparecendo. Ele mencionou uma que eu não peguei o nome, que ele falou a de 2016, que ele falou que está bem recente, né?
Strange Play.
The Strange Play. Então, a Strange Play, que veio à luz aí agora em 2016, e ele falou que ele tem o Google Alert, né, o alerta do Google, que vai mostrando para ele o que está sendo produzido por aí, né, pelo nome do Tennessee, as produções, isso vai aparecendo para ele, e ele fala que são coisas bastante misturadas, assim, tem as peças mais antigas, tem coisas novas, numa noite eles produzem, às vezes, uma peça de 20 anos atrás e outra com 20 anos de gap, né, então a gente tem coisas que vão aparecendo meio que aleatoriamente, né. Ele falou que é um trabalho não científico que ele está fazendo, né? Porque o Google vai aparecendo lá um monte de coisa, mas que ele vai meio que rastreando o que está acontecendo por aí. Fulvio, ok?
Yeah. João Dóia.
Sim,
Todas
obrigado.
as late plays do Tennessee já foram publicadas ou existe alguma que ainda é inédita?
So the next question is João Doria. He's asking whether the late plays of Tennessee Williams have been published or not, if there is one that hasn't been published yet.
There's only one late play that of any significance. I mean, there may be more things in the archives, but they've been gone through. But the one play was a full-length play that was produced in San Francisco in 1976 called This Is, and then in parentheses, an entertainment. And that has not been published.
Ok, então a peça que ele consegue lembrar que não foi publicada é essa de 1976, que foi apresentada em São Francisco, né? This Is, entre parênteses, an entertainment, um entretenimento. É essa daqui que ele sabe.
Ok, só não é Dória. Por favor, não. É Dóia.
É Dóia, Thiago.
Ok.
Thiago gosta de fazer brincar.
What did he say?
Desculpa.
Agora, Osmar Araújo. Qual a relação de Tennessee com o projeto de popularização do teatro nos Estados Unidos de Margot Jones por meio do Theater in the Round, Teatro de Arena? Ele se envolveu nesse projeto?
All right, David. So, what is the relationship between Tennessee Williams with the popularization project of theater in the U.S. by Margot Jones through the Theater in the Round?
Right.
Is there a connection?
Her Dallas Theater project?
I'm not sure. Quem que perguntou? Osmar, the Dallas Project, o projeto de Dallas?
Well, yes, there's some connection in that they were friends and colleagues.
Right.
And she, when he got the contract for Broadway for The Glass Menagerie, Eddie Dowling, who played the lead and who got the rights to it, was the director. And he insisted that his friend Margot Jones be the co-director because he didn't know anybody else involved in it. And his last attempt at a play going to Broadway, Battle of Angels, was a failure. So he wanted he wanted somebody in his corner. So they worked on that, and she directed Stairs to the Roof at the Pasadena Playhouse, and she was going to premiere Summer and Smoke at the Dallas Theater Center, and I'd have to look to see if she did it on Broadway. Do you know, Luis Marcio? But that would have been the extent of their theatrical collaboration, but they were also friends.
Okay.
She didn't direct the Summer and Smoke version. It was not her.
It wasn't
Okay. Okay.
No.
Bom,
It was Menagerie and Stairs to the Roof.
Okay. Menagerie is a co-director, right?
Yeah.
Ok, então ele falou que eles são amigos, né, colegas e tal, mas eles tiveram parcerias no teatro quando teve o contrato. Yeah.
Okay, hang on a second. She did direct Summer and Smoke. It was first produced by Margot Jones at her theater in Dallas, Texas. It was later produced and directed by Miss Jones in New York, opening at the Music Box Theater in October 1948.
Ok.
So that's three major projects at the beginning of his career. So that's something.
Yeah. Então tem essas três parcerias, né? A Glass Menagerie, o zoológico de vidro. No contrato ele já dizia que ele queria a Margot Jones como co-diretora. Stairs to the Roof, também, que foi produzido em Pasadena, também houve essa colaboração. E Summer Smoke, que é o Anjo de Pedra, né, Luís? Em português, o Anjo de Pedra. Então tem esses três projetos aí. É isso aí.
David Medeiros. Thomas, muito obrigado por essa aula maravilhosa. Você poderia falar um pouco sobre a influência de Chekhov na dramaturgia de Tennessee Williams?
Okay, so Thomas, this is David. He's complimenting you, saying thank you very much for the wonderful class. Could you explore a little bit the influence of Chekhov on Tennessee Williams's dramaturgy?
Yes, I think it's one of those cases where it's not exactly, I don't think people necessarily think of the connection in terms of the style, but Williams' plays tend to be character-driven rather than plot-driven. So his plots are not that involved, and they're frequently, the structure of them is weird, they're not typical. What drives the play are the relationships between the people, and I think that is something he was directly influenced from Chekhov.
Ok, então ele disse que não estritamente em relação ao estilo, mas tem uma tendência dos dois, especialmente do Chekhov, de que ele é character driven, ele é motivado por personagens e não necessariamente pelo enredo, not for plot. Não por conta do enredo. Então, isso é algo que, de certa maneira, tem essa convergência aí entre os dois, né? Essa coisa das personagens e não do enredo. Essa motivação do personagem.
It's reflected in the reviews, for example, of The Glass Menagerie. When The Glass Menagerie opened, the critics liked it very much on the whole, but they said repeatedly, this is not a typical play. This is not the kind of play we're used to, even though obviously it's a sweet little family drama. At the time, it was unusual because the plot, as a traditional plot, was not the issue. It was more about what happened between the people.
Uhum. E isso está refletido também na crítica que foi feita do The Glass Menagerie, porque não é aquele típico drama familiar. Ele tem esse foco que é mais dirigido para personagens.
Ok, agora Nilson Otero. Algumas das peças são bem datadas, mas mesmo assim vêm sendo montadas nos tempos atuais, adaptadas. Existe alguma peça tão datada a ponto de não fazer muito sentido montá-la nos dias de hoje?
All right, so the next question is, some of the plays, they are dated. There is a date very marked there, right? So even so, they have been staged recently, right? Is there any play that you think it's so dated that... eu perdi aqui a pergunta que subiu o chat. Oh yeah, is there a play that you consider very dated that, you know, it wouldn't make sense to be staged today, that you think it's historically marked? Oh, the microphone's blocked again.
So sorry. Not off the top of my head. I think some of them have period or dated things that are problematic, and usually people make adjustments for those things. Some things in the language, and some things having to do with race. People you know, what was acceptable in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s is not acceptable now. So I think people tend to make those changes, or they ask for permission to make them. But no, that's one of the strange things about Williams, is that a lot of it doesn't date much in English. People are always surprised that even though it's period, which is different, it takes place, you know, in an earlier time and place, they frequently don't feel dated when you see them in performance.
Right.
Or certain aspects do, but overall they don't. And I think that's a, you know, unusual. And I was talking about it with a class recently and saying that I went and looked at how many plays were on Broadway in 1945 with the Glass Menagerie, and I could only find, there were about 160, and I could only find 2 others that are performed today. Most of the plays just went on the dust heap.
Right. É. Então ele diz que algumas sim, né, mas elas sofrem ajustes, né? Você tem ajustes de linguagem, normalmente os diretores pedem permissão para mudar alguma coisa, né? Alguma linguagem que possa ter conteúdo racial, por exemplo, que precisa ser adaptada para os dias de hoje, mas isso normalmente é contornável. Mas ele acha que as peças do Tennessee, em geral, não são muito datadas, né? E os críticos costumam falar isso, falar, nossa, dá para você fazer em diversos tempos. Ela não é em diversos tempos, ela não é necessariamente marcada ali, datada, né? Ele menciona que numa aula ele estava analisando peças da Broadway que estavam em cartaz em 45 e tinham 160. Dessas 160, hoje você encontra só 2. Então parece que essas peças datadas lá do passado, elas vão meio que pro ash heap, né? Elas vão pro, sei lá, elas vão para debaixo do tapete ali, né? Então as coisas vão se atualizando. Mas a tendência para as peças do Tennessee é se atualizar, especialmente em relação à linguagem.
Ok. Agora, Antônio de Medeiros. Estou bastante encantado com a aula e gostaria de que Thomas... Opa, correu aqui. Opa. Que Thomas pudesse falar do humor nas peças de Tennessee, como, por exemplo, em Period of Adjustment e outras.
All right. So, David, Antonio is saying, I'm really thrilled by your class, and I'd like to know, if you could talk about the humor on Tennessee Williams's plays, such as the period of adjustment and others.
Yes, I can turn on my microphone and answer that question.
Okay.
Well, it's funny. It's period of adjustment is always described as his comedy, that this is different for Tennessee Williams because it's his comedy. And I don't find it that funny. But I do think that there is humor in all his plays. And it's deliberate humor, and it's not cheap laughs. It's constructed to make the audience laugh. It's just not the humor that you get in something that's labeled a comedy. And I always, I say always, I don't know when, but I have many times cautioned people that if you go to see a production of a Tennessee Williams play, any of the full-length ones, any of the ones in the like top 10, you know, his most famous works, and most of the one acts, if the audience doesn't laugh about something within the first 10 minutes or so, something's not working. And that includes Menagerie, Streetcar, Cat. They're very funny characters in there. And because he's so serious, and maybe because of the heightened language, people don't always see it. And they take him very soberly. But the humor is there. And it's interesting because the times that he set out to be funnier, he is, but it's usually black comedy, like in the slapstick tragedy, right? And that was one of the things. There was a recent production of The Mutilated in New York, and it surprised audiences because it has the title The Mutilated, but it's a comedy, and it's very, very funny.
Ok. Então ele menciona que, na verdade, a comédia ela está em todas as peças dele, né? A gente encontra o humor em praticamente todas as peças. E aí ele falou que ele dá um conselho para as pessoas que vão assistir as peças do Tennessee, que é, olha, se você for assistir alguma peça e nos primeiros 10 minutos você não ri, tem alguma coisa ali que deu errado, né? Ele atribui a essa misunderstanding, né, esse mal entendido, essa coisa que não funciona, muito por conta da linguagem, porque as pessoas às vezes não enxergam na linguagem, elas não conseguem ver, elas acham que é uma coisa muito sóbria, né? Mas está lá. Ele fala, it's there, né? A comédia está lá. Ele mencionou o exemplo dessa produção de Nova York, do The Mutilated, né? Das mutiladas, que o título é, né, uma coisa muito doida, assim, e é uma comédia, né? Então é uma comédia ácida, né? É um dark humor.
Elizabeth.
E ele falou também, que ele não acha Period of Adjustment engraçado, né?
Pois é, lá no começo, Period of Adjustment. Ele falou que ele não acha que é uma comédia, mas ele não curte, ele não acha engraçado, né? Yes.
Mesmo porque trata de questões ligadas à guerra, né? Homens com problemas da guerra, né? Que veio com resquícios da guerra da Coreia. É uma peça bem interessante, mas eu também não achei engraçado.
Okay, all right. Then we have the last question, right?
Thiago, Elizabeth Cartacho, a que se deve ao que me parece ser uma rasa compreensão das obras de Tennessee, excluindo as peças associadas ao sucesso comercial de uma forma geral, em particular no Brasil? Qual sua reflexão no âmbito do seu profundo conhecimento do dramaturgo?
All right, Thomas, to what do you think there is a shallow comprehension of Tennessee Williams's plays, right? It owes to what, this shallow comprehension of his plays, excluding plays that are associated to commercial success in general, particularly in Brazil. What's your reflection regarding, concerning your deep knowledge of Tennessee Williams? I think I would phrase it this way. Like, it owes to what? This shallow comprehension.
The shallow comprehension. What do you mean by shallow? Is there another way to say that?
You can say like little understanding, people don't understand too much. Like, let's say the depth of the contents of the play,
I would only speculate, I'm guessing, but I would assume it has something to do with translation.
Okay.
There's because, well, that's a whole other subject, but translation is translation, and I don't know if everything easily would translate into Brazilian Portuguese. There was a famous production of A Streetcar Named Desire at the Comédie Française in Paris in 2011. And it was the first non-European play the Comédie Française had done in their 333 years. And when they were working on the translation for what they would do on stage, they found there was nothing that they could translate that would make the French understand the culture and character of Southerners in the French Quarter of New Orleans. There was nothing comparable.
Okay.
And so they actually chose a kind of a Japanesque or a chinoiserie motif that was popular in the 19th century, but that the French, not me, but the French would understand having the same qualities of New Orleans at that time. So that's just one example that I know of where somebody said, okay, wait a minute, how do we really not just translate the words, but translate the sense of it? And I would assume that has something to do with it. And what I know about the productions that Luis, Márcio, and Andres have worked on is that they seem, you translate them as truthfully for sense as you can, but you also translate them for your Brazilian audience in the way you tell the story. Would that be correct? Like with Inferno?
Okay.
I'm asking Luis, Márcio to jump in here, but I think that would be the number one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if how can you see what I mean? If the translation doesn't speak to the Brazilian audience, how can they appreciate it fully?
Right.
Or if they don't understand it fully, then it's easier to sort of reduce it and go, oh, that's what that is. That's not a large, capacious lyrical play. That's something smaller.
Yeah. Então ele menciona, Beth, que ele menciona um exemplo ele acredita que tenha muito a ver com a linguagem e a questão da tradução. Ele falou, eu estou só especulando, eu não tenho uma ideia assim muito concreta, mas especulando aqui, ele pensa, a primeira coisa que ele pensa é a questão da tradução, né? E ele vai dizer que o bonde chamado Desejo, numa montagem que foi feita na França, a questão da tradução, eles tiveram muito problema com isso, porque ele chegou à conclusão de que nada faria sentido ali para os franceses traduzirem, especialmente no que diz respeito à questão daquele grupo de pessoas de New Orleans, sul dos Estados Unidos, aquilo não faria muito sentido. Então, um pouco desse desentendimento ou desse mal entendimento vem por conta dessa questão da tradução. Ele fala que nessa época eles podia se traduzir ou entender coisa que vinha do século XIX, uma certa essência meio japonesa, meio chinesa, né? Então ele fala que a dificuldade é não só em traduzir a palavra, mas traduzir o sentido também, né? E aí ele termina falando, olha, se a tradução não dialoga, por exemplo, ele menciona a tradução do Inferno, né? Ele falou para o Luís Márcio pular na conversa, se a tradução não dialoga com o público brasileiro, ela perde um pouco o sentido, e aí você tem os descaminhos, as más compreensões, né? Acho que é por aí.
Ok, Thiago. Sim.
Well, thank you. Please tell Thiago we missed him. Can you hear me?
He'll send you hugs, and he's apologizing that he can't stay.
He did a really good job, and I was trying to talk slowly, but I used a lot of terminology that he had to grab for, and he did a good job.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Nós vamos passar o seu agradecimento para ele. We are going to tell him what you said. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we are 30 minutes more than we okay. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much. It was great having you here with us.
Thank you.
I think it would be very worth to everybody. If you, por favor, se vocês puderem ligar as câmeras para o Thomas ver o rostinho de todo mundo e a gente tirar uma foto. I'm inviting everybody to turn on their videos, cameras, and we are going to take a photo.
I think Thiago is back now. Oh no, he just left.
Oh shoot, he was here for a second.
Ok, vocês puderem tirar foto, depois vocês mandam para a gente, por favor. Isso, todo mundo pegando. Bela, Jonathan, Antônio. Beth. Oh, everybody's turn on the videos so that Emmas can know us by face. Oh,
Yeah.
great.
On the chat, Thomas, people are saying on the chat that your class was wonderful, marvelous. The adjectives vary, but they are all very good. And thanking you very much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you look like a great group. I'm sorry I won't be joining you again, or maybe I'll sneak into your class. I can get Thiago. There's Thiago. There he goes. Whoops. Yeah, he's quick. Okay. Okay. Have a good night. Thank you all.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay.
Boa noite, pessoal. Obrigado, gente.
Bye bye, Thomas.
Obrigado, Agenor. Obrigado.
Bye bye.
Obrigado, Thomas, Fulvio, Luís, Márcio.
Thomas, boa noite.
Boa noite a todos e até a próxima.
Obrigado.
Ótima semana.
Boa noite.